That really concerns us these days is the continued trophy hunting of lions. And this has been going on for years and years and years. And I think what has been happening is that the numbers of lions have declined, not only because of trophy hunting, but also for some other reasons. For example, diseases. They're running out of space. There's a lot of conflict with cattle and things like that. So lion numbers have been decreasing over the years. And we'll have very few left in Africa. So close your eyes now. This is lion trophy hunting. Okay, I mean we all know that it happens, and it costs quite a bit of money. You might recognize the guy on the right here. That's Sir David Scobie, who was going to be governor of the Bank of England or something like that. Anyway, he shot this lion in Zambia. And the other guy up on the top there, he's the hunter. He's on the right-hand side. He was also the hunter who accompanied the King of Spain. You remember when the King of Spain had to step down from WWF because he found out that he was shooting elephants in Africa. So these days we have three types of lions. The top one, Panthera leokrugeri, those are the ones in eastern southern Africa, and there's 14,000 of those. Then we have a very unusual lion, which is now called Panthera leosenegalensis. There are about 400 of those left, and those are from West Africa. And then of course we have a very small remnant population of lions in India. Now, the Western African lions are not related that much to the Southern and Eastern African lions. They're much more closely related to the ones in India for some reason. So even though India is quite far away, the connection still exists. Now, one of the things that has happened, when I show you those numbers, they might seem like relatively large numbers, but this is the actual situation when you look at these Western African lions, for example. You see all the way on the left there's Senegal, there's 16 lions left. Okay. Then in the middle, there's Burkina Faso and Benin, there's about 350. Then it was a population that was also trophy hunted. And then a huge country like Nigeria, you could fit the UK about twice in Nigeria and have some room left over. There's 32 lions on the left of Nigeria and 2 lions on the right. Hopefully those two are opposite sexes. But that is the sort of situation that you have right now in Africa. You can see the darker part of the map, not the black population, existing population, but the darker shading of the map is where lines used to occur, and used to occur about 200 years ago. So you can see most of the lines have been extirpated across their range, and that is very much the picture in the rest of Africa as well. Now, we had a discussion recently with Rory Stewart. He was then DEFRA minister, and we had a discussion with him about this whole trophy hunting import business and things like that. And he said, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to recruit David MacDonald at Oxford University to come up with some sort of report in terms of what we should do with lions. Now, I should tell you that David MacDonald operates at least 2 lion research programs in Africa, one in Zimbabwe, in Hwange National Park, and the other one is in Tanzania. So MacDonald has a vested interest in terms of staying in Africa, and a previous researcher who was working in Serengeti, when he came out very strongly against trophy hunting, he found that his research permit was withdrawn by the Tanzanian government and he had 48 hours to leave the country. So MacDonald had to be very, very careful in terms of what he said about trophy hunting because he doesn't want to risk his research permits. Basically, what he came up with is, especially if you look at the last sentence there, it says, starting from here, where trophy hunting is well regulated, transparent, and devolves sufficient authority to the land managers, it has the potential to contribute to land conservation. But in many countries, poor governance and weak regulation can lead to unsustainable trophy hunting. So in other words, he's put so many qualifiers in there that basically it doesn't make sense what he's trying to say. But what he is trying to say is that if everything goes right, then, trophy hunting in lines is still all right, according to David McDonald. Now, we had a meeting with him, which led to the support. He was supposed to consult with a lot of people, and we were very much against the trophy hunting of lions, but he came up with this. And one of the things that I pointed out to him is that what he is saying there in that report, delivered last year, is that 22 years ago, the Tanzanian government put together a report that said exactly the same thing. Right? 22 years ago, no progress. And the report said, we need rural communities to get more money, we need tourist hunting there's very little revenue that comes to the government, the hunters have not always conducted themselves according to high standards of conduct, etc., etc., etc. So 22 years on, and David McDonald is still saying the same thing. Yeah, it's all right if everybody does a good job. And, of course, they're not, because they haven't changed. And this is the consequence. Now, lions, and this was in 2004, 2007, 2006. This is just a few pictures, probably lots more are available, but these are lions that are about 2 years old that are being shot. What happens is that in a lot of countries, you're only allowed to shoot male lions, and male lions have the manes, and those are the ones that are the ones that are interesting to the hunter anyway. Very few hunters want to go out and shoot a female because that doesn't impress their friends. So what happens is that you only shoot males, and then but these males are so young that they haven't even reproduced yet. It's very destructive of the population to shoot animals that age, and of course once these lions are brought home, the taxidermist will facilitate and put a little bit of a mane on so it looks nice. Right? But these are the kinds of lions that were being shot. Rory Stewart said that, and he said this in June in Parliament, he said, in recognition of the real concerns about the impact of trophy hunting on lion conservation, I announced in Parliament 2015. 24 November 2015 is when we had an adjournment debate, and Rory was the minister who received the debate. We also had an adjournment debate 5 years earlier in 2010 on the same issue. So he said that the government will ban lion trophy imports by the end of 2017, this year, unless there are improvements in the way that hunting takes place in certain countries, judged against strict criteria. Okay? We will work with our European and international partners and experts in the field to reach a common approach on this issue. So that's what he said on 24th of November 2015. Now, then, when we started writing some letters and constituents started writing letters to their MPs, Andrea Leadsom replied to Anne Milton and to Philip Hammond. You should know that guy. He's center stage today.
Says it all, doesn't it, really?
So Philip Hammond and Anne Milton then wrote to Andrea and said, come on, Andrea, what's your position? And Andrea said, the government recognized that properly managed illegal and sustainable hunting, in other words, the same old thing that came out in the report by McDonald. And she said, we have no plans to ban the import of animals or animal parts of endangered species legally hunted abroad. Now, she's wrong, because the UK already bans things like imports of walrus ivory from Canada, legally hunted in Canada. You can't bring walrus ivory into the UK. You cannot bring any kind of wolf products from Canada, USA, and Norway into the UK. And certainly you cannot bring whale meat from Iceland and Norway into the UK. So, the fact that she says that we have no plans to ban the import of animals, blah, 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 that's wrong to begin with. right? But then she also says, import of trophies down at the bottom there, import of trophies from certain countries where hunting of lions cannot be considered sustainable, you know, maybe we can make a deal on that. So again, there's lots of flip-flopping around in terms of, you know, she says one thing to one MP and another thing to another MP. Now, everybody talks about this concept of sustainable utilization. Now, sustainable utilization is not defined. Nobody knows really what it means. It's just one of those nice phrases that everybody likes to use because, you know, when you talk about WWF, for example, or the IUCN, they all say, well, you know, yes, we need wildlife and we're going to use it sustainably, so there's no real problem. So, but sustainable utilization is not definable. There is no burden of proof and there are no penalties if you don't do it. And also, unless there's scientific proof, it remains an empty concept, like I said, despite almost universal political and vested interest acceptance. And the other problem is that when we start talking about, you know, things like sustainability, this is the situation, for example, in Tanzania. I'll also talk about Zambia. In the green, those are the national parks. So up in the top there, you have the Serengeti. Then you have in the middle there, you have Tarangire, Ruaha, down on the sort of the center of the screen. But what I really want you to focus on is this little green area here. That's called Mikumi National Park, and that sits right on the Selous concession hunting area, that kind of thing. Now, one thing I want you to take away from this is the way that these national parks are completely surrounded by the hunting areas. And what is happening more and more, and, you know, maybe some of you remember the situation with Cecil that was killed in Zimbabwe. What's happening is that the wildlife in the national parks is being sucked out into the hunting areas and is being shot there. There are no barriers, there's no fences or anything like that. So you can see these national parks are completely surrounded by various hunting areas. Now remember, again, that little thing that I showed you there, that Mikumi. In Tanzania, Mikumi, that little tiny photographic concession that occupies only about 10% of the Selous, generates the equivalent of 30% of all income from hunting blocks to the government. So that little park generates 30% of all income from all the hunting blocks, all those other areas that are not colored in green. There's Mikumi, that little place, 30%. Also, 30% of all these hunting areas, looks like there's a lot of them, but 30% of them are now defunct. 90,000 square kilometers, empty of wildlife, they've been overhunted, you know, everything is killed. The hunting areas that are supposed to provide income to the government provide 37 cents per square kilometer to the government. 37 cents is absolutely nothing. If you cultivate maize in Africa, you can make about $25,000 per square kilometer. So the government is wasting its time, you know, allocating all these hunting concessions. They're not getting any returns from it. Trophy hunting, in fact, generates the least finance to Tanzanian government for any form of land use in Africa, and also the other countries as well. And of course, trophy hunting is very destructive of wildlife. And another person has said, as far as any benefits going to communities allocating their land to hunting concessions, this only amounts to about 50 cents per person per year. Now, this is on community land, right, where the communities are getting paid by the concession owners. But if you break that down into what they earn per person, it's about 50 cents per person per year to allocate their land to hunting, right? So they can buy an egg with them. Let's look at Zambia, same sort of situation. Here you have, this is North Luangwa, South Luangwa National Park, Zambezi, and this is Kafue there. You can see in the cross-hatched areas now are the national parks. The darker areas are the hunting concessions. Again, it's the same pattern, completely surrounding the national parks. And
people who've been studying the lines there can show clearly that, you know, these, in fact, in South Luang, where they're about 70% of the male lions that they have are shot in these hunting areas over the years. And again, in Zambia, the dark areas, there's about 167,000 square kilometers allocated to game management areas. 24 of the 36 total game management areas are now completely depleted of wildlife. So hunting does not conserve anything. Okay?
When you say depleted of wildlife, does that mean all game?
Well, you might find an impala.
And that's about it.
That's about it. And, you know, or a dik-dik or something like that. But the thing is, you know, in terms of attractiveness for those GMAs to a hunting concession or even to a photographic concession, there's nothing there, you know, because they've been completely hunted out. And the wildlife in the game management areas is 93% lower than carrying capacity. And this is a map of, or a graph rather, of what is happening in Zambia these days. In the lighter gray, that shows the carrying capacity of all the hunting concessions listed along the bottom here. And you can see in the black, that is actually what is there now. Those are the actual animals in the area. And in the lighter gray, that's the carrying capacity. And you can see all the hunting areas are practically depleted of game. So hunting doesn't conserve anything, despite you know, a lot of people saying, well, you know, we need these areas, we need the hunting areas because, you know, the national parks are, in terms of area, are quite small, and so therefore, you know, wildlife thrives because they have all these additional areas in the hunting concessions. But that is the real picture of what is happening in the hunting concessions. There's hardly anything there. So, trophy hunting doesn't conserve wildlife. Trophy hunting doesn't benefit the government. Trophy hunting doesn't benefit the rural communities. And I must say, trophy hunting does really well in the corrupt nations. Right? Because that's where you can go to the minister and you can say, look, I want a hunting concession and here's $20,000 for you. And then it's signed and off you go. If there was a real evaluation of the benefit of hunting, I don't think that a lot of these countries would be carrying on with it. Now, to date, a lot of other nations have banned lion trophies. For example, Australia started the ball rolling in March 2015. France then joined in November 2015. The Netherlands recently started in April 2016. So those are the countries right now that have already said that they will ban completely all the imports of lion trophies. So when Rory Stewart said, okay, well, I want to bring some countries with me, well, he was left behind, right? Because a lot of countries are already doing it. And the USA, where about 60% of all hunting trophies of anything go, and about 55–60% of lion trophies as well. The USA recently came out February 2016. The USA came out with, they placed lions on their endangered species list as a threatened species. And what they said is that they now have very, very strict requirements for lion trophy imports. Right? And what they said basically is that you have to show that lion trophy imports are actually beneficial to the species. Since they put that into place, not one lion trophy has been imported into the US because nobody can prove that that lion trophy is benefiting the conservation of lions. And again, you know, it was a situation where, you know, we wanted the UK to play a really strong role, but like I said, they've been left behind by Australia, France, and the Netherlands, and then also by the USA in terms of, you know, the much stricter regulations. Now, this you can get, right? This is now your House of Commons Trophy Hunting and International Policy briefing paper. In there, guess what it says? Oops. The government considers properly managed legal and sustainable trophy hunting. There we go. Right? Same thing that McDonald said, same thing that everybody's saying, and there it is in the briefing document for the House of Commons. Repeated time and time and time again. But it does say we will continue to monitor the impact of trophy hunting. Well, we know what the impact of trophy hunting is. You don't need to monitor it anymore. And we will work to put in place greater protection, including prohibiting imports, if it is shown to be needed. But what we're saying is it's needed. We don't need to show that it's needed, it's needed. Right? We don't need to monitor the impact of trophy hunting because we already know what the impact of trophy hunting is. Right? So let's move forward a little bit. Now, then, Rory Stewart said also, this was in September 2016, we have not carried out an assessment of the effect of lion trophy imports into the UK on wider conservation, blah, blah, blah. So, in other words, he's saying, well, I'm not going to, I'm not going to stop trophy hunting imports, but he says also that he hasn't worked out any kind of assessment. But he also says, down at the bottom there, he's starting to change his tune a little bit. He says an import permit is only issued if the trade is not considered detrimental to the survival of the species in the wild. So that's a little bit different now, because before he was talking about sustainable, and now he's talking a little bit more about detrimental, which is, along the U.S. lines, where the U.S. said you have to prove, the U.S. went one step further. Not only, is it you have to show that it's not detrimental, but you have to show that it actually improved conservation of that species. So, that's what we're aiming for, okay? Your constituents and NGOs like us are asking for a lot of clarity. Constituents have written to 58 MPs.
59 now.
59 now, okay. Keep coming. And, what the constituents wanted to know is why are there so many conflicting statements from the government? We don't know what's going on. You ask Andrea Ledson, she has one story. Rory Stewart, he's now moved on from DEFRA. But, he comes up with something else. Your House of Commons briefing document says one thing and then it says something else on another page. There is absolutely no clarity. So, this is what we're saying. Can't we at least require that trophy hunting imports provide clear conservation benefits for the species involved? In other words, if you want to go and shoot a lion just for your personal enjoyment, can't you at least ensure that the money that you are spending is going to the conservation of that species whose life you're taking? This is not rocket science, it's very clear. That's the US model. And we need to throw out these woolly concepts about sustainability and hunter reforms and all that kind of stuff. Because, like I said, Tanzania was calling for hunting reforms in 1995 and it still hasn't happened. Right? How many times do you want to kick that dead horse? So, what we're also saying is, well, why ban lion trophies into the UK? Especially only, there's only about 3 or 4 lion trophies imported annually into the UK. But, in terms of European Union, for example, the biggest countries are Germany and Spain and places like that. So the UK doesn't import very many lion trophies, but the UK does have influence well beyond its borders. Right? If the UK joins the other countries now, a clear message is being sent, and a clear message is being sent from a country that has, very wide diplomatic relations and part of the Commonwealth, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So what I'm saying is the UK now has a belated chance to make a clear statement on whether trophy hunting can be at all a realistic conservation measure for any vulnerable and endangered species, in other words, lions. And of course, the UK public doesn't like trophy hunting at all. So perhaps we can do this, because the constituents are asking for real evidence of conservation benefits of trophy hunting. It is not good enough for the UK government to say, well, we have contacted the relevant minister in, let's say, Tanzania or Zimbabwe, and they say that trophy hunting is fine. Right? It's not going to, that level of trust. I don't think we can extend without having some sort of independent information. All the independent information that's coming out through, by the way, some of the studies that McDonald is conducting are showing the negative effects of trophy hunting. Negative effects in Tanzania, negative effects in Zambia, negative effects in Zimbabwe, negative effects in Cameroon. You name it, all the countries are showing where there's some information being gathered. All the countries where lions are being looked at have shown a very strong detrimental effect on lions. So the UK government must not accept statistics that include protected populations in quota setting. Because what happens is when you go to one of these ministers and you ask them, and I have a very good example in Zambia, for example, you ask them how many lions are there in your country. Well, the Minister of Tourism Arts in Zambia said, we have 4,400. Her wildlife department said, well, hold on a second, you've only got about 1,800 according to us, the wildlife department. Then the researchers came out and they said, well, actually, we've counted them recently and there's only about 400. So, off by a factor of 10. The minister in Zambia said, well, okay, 400, that means that we can shoot 46 per year. Adult males, 46. If you have 400 lions, that means out of that population, only 10% are adult males, so you're shooting 46 when you've only got 40. And, like I showed you, the hunting areas don't have lions anymore. They have to come out of the national parks. So what happens is that, when you ask these guys in Africa how many lions do you have, what they do is they give you the figure of the populations in the national parks. Now, by definition, you can't touch those animals because they're protected. So therefore, they should be taken completely out of the equation. What we need to do and what we need to assess is if somebody says, well, trophy hunting is sustainable and all that kind of thing. Of course it isn't. But if they say it's sustainable, then somebody should be able to say, well, let's do this. Let's go into the hunting areas. Let's see how many lions you have in the hunting areas and base your decision on quota setting and all that stuff on the animals that are in the hunting concessions and not in the national parks. And I'll bet you that when that is done, we will find out exactly what we have been suspecting and what people are now gathering some information for, is that there are no lions in the hunting concessions anymore because they've been shot at. Remember those pictures I showed you about the 2-year-old lions that were being shot? Okay, that is a direct consequence of overshooting in hunting areas. There are no more lions in the hunting areas. That's why Cecil hunting. That's why all these lions have to be lured out of the national parks, and that's why the hunting concessions are all clustered around the national park to take advantage of the animals that are living in the national parks. So, what I would like to see the UK government do is to call for some really strong independent data, right? If the countries want to insist on continued trophy hunting of lions, and if the UK is going to continue to import lions from these countries, then we have to have some good information. What is in the hunting areas? Forget about the national park, what is in the hunting area? Because we think that lions, at the rate that they're going now, there's about 5 to 10 years left for reasonable populations. I said, in the beginning that there were 3 kinds of lions. The eastern and southern African lions are doing well, about 14,000 of those left. But remember, 14,000 sounds like a lot, but that means you've got, Africa's a big continent, so you have 50 lions here and you have 30 lions there. And if you add all up those small populations up, you end up with 14,000. But that's not conservation. And all those small populations are very, very vulnerable. For example, in 1994, the population in the Serengeti was hit by canine distemper, which is one disease, and 30% of the lions died. Now, luckily, the Serengeti had 3,000 lions at that point, so they could you can lose 30% of the lions out of that big population, because those big populations are a little bit resilient. You take those small populations, like I showed you, like in Nigeria, 32 lions, you can wipe those out, in a second with the disease, or even with a forest fire, or with a drought, or something like that. It doesn't take much for those small populations to be completely gone. So that's why I say, we We only really have about 5 to 10 years left, even though the numbers look large. It's a very, very vulnerable species, and every year that goes by, they become more vulnerable. So, we would strongly recommend, therefore, that the UK should ban any further imports of lion trophies and make that statement very clearly that the UK is not going to do this anymore, because otherwise, that's what the passport is going to look like soon. No lie. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you for that, Peter. I think when I first met you guys, I was sort of under the impression we had come a long way in terms of wildlife and protecting things. It was a bit of a shock for me to discover actually that wasn't the case.